Hey, welcome to Sisterhood. I'm so thankful that we get to be back in the room together again and get to see all of your beautiful faces. And you guys are a competitive group of women. That was so much fun to watch. Well, I want to introduce myself for all of those people who are here for the very first time. My name is Kristen, and my husband, Colby, is the lead pastor here at this church. And we've been married this summer. We're going to celebrate the big 2-5 this summer. Yeah? I'm going to tell you what that means. That means I'm like this close to getting them all trained. Like, super close. I've got a lot of investment into him. Like, he knows now how to correctly fold the towels, like 2, 3, 2, so that way they fit in the linen closet. He knows how to put both toilet seats down when he flushes, right? I don't want any particles on my toothbrush, so both seats. He knows which pillow he can put his heads on, right? And which ones are just decorative only. I won't say the same thing for the 4 young men in our house that we're raising. Like, a few of them I've kind of given up on, and I'm just gonna be like, here, future wife. Like, I tried, I did my best, I'm tapping out, you're it. Well, tonight, we're gonna talk about something that is probably, I'm gonna say 100% of us in this room deal with this. And I feel like I should start with like a funny joke or something like that, because tonight we're gonna talk about disappointment. Yay, right? Disappointment. Kind of like what some of you felt like when you jumped on that box and it went crashing to the ground. Well, I don't have any jokes for you, but I'm gonna start with a story. So I want you guys to help me. Tell me, how many of you are either currently or have ever in your life been a cheerleader? Let me see if you've been a cheerleader. Spirit fingers. Okay, good. Okay, that's a lot of you in the room. You guys are gonna understand this story then. All right, picture this. 8th grade. The year was 1992. Or 91 or 92. I was a cheerleader on our junior high cheerleading squad. I lived outside of Lexington, Kentucky, in a little town called Harrodsburg, and we take cheerleading very seriously in the South. So we had spent days and weeks and months practicing gymnastics classes. We had qualified for the national competition, so we were gearing up to go compete in nationals. That year, they were in Nashville, Tennessee, then it was the Opryland Hotel. So we were all ready. We traveled down to Nashville, and we're getting ready to compete in the national competition. And so picture this, like, they change all the ballrooms in the Opryland Hotel. They change those into like rooms where you would compete. So they bring in the floors, and they bring in the stage and the curtains behind you and all that kind of stuff. And we are waiting. The time has come for us to compete, to do our routine. And we are waiting outside of the ballroom in the hallway. And we have all our skirts, and they're all pleated and ironed just the right way. And we taken our sponge rollers out of our hair, and we had our big blue bows on, and we were ready to go. And all of a sudden, you hear from inside the ballroom, you hear from Harrodsburg, Kentucky, Harrodsburg Junior High. And we bob our way out there with our spirit fingers and all of our Go Big Blues. And we get into the middle, and we get in our wherever we were supposed to start in our formation. And we waited for the music to start. And it starts. We're killing it, doing all of our stunts and tumbling, and our routine's going perfect. And then somewhere in that huge resort turned off the lights in that ballroom. And it's like an interior ballroom. Like, there's no windows. Decades before cell phones where everyone could flip on their flashlight for you. Like, it was dark. And you want to know what we did? We were superior athletes, remember? So we kept going. Like, who needs lights? You guys, we stunted, we finished our entire routine in the dark. I am not lying. The whole thing in the dark. And then with one last go big blue, like we walked out back into that hallway. Now I have a picture of us sitting in this hallway. Now this was before we competed. I've got a picture on the screen. There we are in the hallway. I'm in the middle right there. There's my dad and my mom and my sister talking to us. But there was our little cheerleading squad. It looked nothing like that after we walked out, after we competed. You know what that group of cheerleaders looked like? A blubbering, hot mess, tears, crying, meltdown. What just happened? They turned off the lights, and how are they gonna judge us? And what's gonna happen? Are we gonna have to redo our routine? You guys would have thought someone died if you walked around that corner and saw all those cheerleaders melting down. We were so disappointed. We were so disappointed. Disappointment, you can be disappointed in all sorts of things, can't you? Funny things. You can be disappointed when they cancel your favorite show on Netflix. Not gonna make any more. You can be disappointed. You can be disappointed when they stop carrying your favorite mascara in the store. Like, what are you gonna do? Or when they close your favorite restaurant. There are so many things in life that we can be disappointed about. We can be disappointed when they turn out the lights when you're trying to do your last toe touch, right? But there's also a lot of like real things that we can be disappointed with in life. And like, how do we deal with that? That's what we're gonna talk about tonight. Like, how do we deal with that? Are we allowed to be disappointed? Are we allowed to feel those types of feelings? Have you ever watched a kid sprint? Like sprint down a driveway or a sidewalk, parking lot, something, and they're running, and then all of a sudden they fall? And now if it's a toddler, the world's over, right? They are screaming and crying, kind of like us cheerleaders, like world's over. But think about with me like a late elementary aged boy or a middle school aged boy. Like they bite it, and what do? You like go to help, and they're like getting up, and they're like, stop, mom, like I'm fine. Like nothing happened, it didn't hurt, I don't want to talk about it. And then later on that night, you're in their room like helping them rip their pants off because it's like stuck to this oozy spot on their knee where they tried to cover it up. Okay, that sound though sometimes like the way that we treat disappointment. We are running through life just fine, and then something trips us up. And we're like, no, girl, you gotta get back up. You gotta keep going. It doesn't hurt, don't cry. And we just keep it covered. Can I just whisper a few words to you tonight and let you know that in this room, like you're not alone in dealing with disappointment? People all throughout the Bible dealt with disappointment. People like the prophet Elijah dealt with it. Sarah, even David. I go so far as to say probably all people throughout the course of time have dealt with disappointment in some way or another. And so tonight, I just want to make sure we're all starting from the same place. Like, what is disappointment? Disappointment is just that temporary letdown, that feeling of sadness that we experience when things don't go the way we expected, which is different from depression, which can be the result of a chemical imbalance in your physical body. Like tonight, we're just gonna talk about disappointment. Because I think if we can learn to identify and correctly deal with our disappointment, that we can cut short the enemy's hope to keep us stuck. Because when we get stuck in disappointment, you know what it turns into? It turns into discouragement. And discouragement, I heard someone say this once, it stuck with me. He said that discouragement is the anesthetic that the devil uses on your heart before he wrecks your future. Discouragement is the anesthetic that the devil uses on your heart before he wrecks your future. Because if you find yourself discouraged, you're at a place then where like you can't see a way out. You start making choices that you never thought that you would make. And you know when you're moving from disappointment to discouragement because now you're losing hope. You're checking out. Sometimes we become desperate to control when we get there. We become bitter or cynical. We're mad at God. We lose faith. It's just not a place that we want to find ourselves in. So tonight, we're going to talk about disappointment. So if you've got a Bible, we're going to be in 3 different places tonight. If you want to follow along, we're going to kind of start at the beginning. We're going to look in 1 Samuel 30, then towards the middle in Job 1, and we're going to end up near the end of John 11. 1 Samuel 30, Job 1, John 11. But if you don't want to turn to all those places, we're going to have all the verses up on the side screens. And this really is a message that I want to get through the material and get to the moment, because I have been praying about tonight. I really feel like I have such an expectation of the way that God is going to move in our hearts tonight. I just want to give him the space to do that. So let's jump in right away. We're going to look at 3 biblical just examples of where disappointment can be found. Okay, so the first place we can find disappointment can be relational. Relational. I want you to raise your hand tonight if you have ever been disappointed in anyone ever, right? All of us. We've all faced that at one time or another. So look at 1 Samuel 30 with me. This is a story about David and some of his men, some of these warriors that he is fighting with. They are soldiers. They've been out there together, doing life together, putting their lives on the line next to each other. And you remember David. So in 1 Samuel 16, he was anointed as king of Israel. So not yet appointed, but anointed. In chapter 17, he kills Goliath. And then he spends the next 15 years banished by the current king, on the run, fighting with his men. And this is where we see him in 1 Samuel 30. We're going to pick it up here. David and his men had been told that they were not allowed to fight with the Philistines. So in this moment, they are headed home. David and his men are on their way home. Verse 1 says this: 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag. They had crushed Ziklag, which was their home, crushed it, burned it to the ground. They carried off the women and children and everybody else without killing anyone. So can you imagine what these warriors are thinking? They're like, we've given our life to serve this man who's been promised to be king. We're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and why is this happening? Like, our women and our children, our town has been burned to the ground. And David, he lost his family too. And I can just imagine him saying, God, like, I've given my life to serve you. Like, why has this happened? Look at verse 3. When David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. You know what that feels like, don't you? When you could, weep until you can't weep anymore. Think about the last time that happened to you. Like, past the snotty mess phase, into the, like, my eyes are red and swollen and my head hurts and all I need to do now is sleep. Think about that phase. Maybe, though, right now you are not giving yourself permission to even go there. Like, you're in a season of life where you're like, you have to stay strong. I won't even let myself cry, because am I even allowed to be sad? Am I allowed to be disappointed? Am I supposed to even be feeling those things? In this verse, we see that these men, these incredible, strong, fierce warriors, they come home, they find that everything's gone, and then these strong men, they weep until they can weep no more. Verse 6, David was now in great danger because all of his men were very bitter about losing their sons and their daughters, and they began to talk of stoning him. So, okay, let's put ourselves in David's shoes. Like, if you look back in all of 1 Samuel, it's David and his men, David and his men, David and his men, David and his men. Like, these guys were tight. They lived together. They traveled together. They ate together. I'm sure they told stories together. They had fun together. They fought together. But now, all of a sudden, behind his back, they're talking about killing him. That verse goes on to say, but David found strength in the Lord his God. And he found strength in the Lord his God and not his friends, because the Lord was the only one he had left. Like, his friends were talking about killing him. And I'm sure he was like, God, why? Like, I thought these were my guys. I thought they'd be faithful. I thought they were on my side. You heard yourself say something similar? Like, why, God? Like, I never thought that our friendship would turn out like this. Or I never thought I'd get to the place where my parents aren't speaking to me anymore. Or I never thought having a blended family would be so hard. Or I never thought that he would leave. Like, he told me it would be forever. I never thought my kids would grow up and leave my home and not talk to us anymore. Never thought that this person would hurt me. Listen, as long as we are in relationships with human beings who are imperfect, there will be the possibility that we will be disappointed by the behaviors, the weaknesses, the choices of other people. Disappointment can be relational. Disappointment can also be situational. We can find ourselves disappointed just by the situations that we find ourselves in, whether we caused it or not. And I want to show you tonight, like in your own Bible, where disappointment can just be situational, nothing that we did. Let's look at Job 1 together. We're going to start in verse 13. This is what we read in Job. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you about it. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who escaped to tell you about it. And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters who were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, they were there when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. Later in Job 6, listen to the way Job describes his disappointment. He says, if only my anguish could be weighed and all of my misery placed on the scales, it would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. Have you ever experienced, not those exact circumstances, thank goodness, but a day like that? Where it was one thing, and then it was another, and then it was another. Like when it rains, it pours. Maybe you wake up to a no thank you email from a job that you had applied for that you really wanted, or we regret to inform you, but you're not accepted into your first college choice. And then you get in the car and you're driving during the day and you get into a fender bender, and now you have to deal with insurance, and then you get home that night and your babysitter calls and cancels, and now that time away that you were so looking forward to, you're not going to be able to do it. Or maybe it's a medical crisis in your life, like a suspicious lump that you found, or another negative pregnancy test, or maybe a note from the insurance, like, I'm sorry, we're not going to cover that. Now you're going to have to fight that battle. Maybe it's a diagnosis that you never thought you'd hear. Or maybe your situation it has to do with like a tough conversation that you have to have with your husband and about work. And maybe you're coming to the place where the bills are piling up and now you've got to go back to work. Or maybe the reverse is true, and the cost of you working and the cost of childcare and gas and lunches and clothes and all that stuff is not really covering what you need to bring in. And so now you got to put your career on hold, which you understand, but you just never thought it was going to be this way. Like you didn't think your life was going to turn out like this. So you can just fill in the blank tonight with your own situation. But God, like, why is this happening to me? I think as long as we live in an imperfect world, we're gonna find ourselves disappointed with situations caused by imperfect circumstances. But one day, we're gonna leave behind this imperfect world for a perfect one, amen? And I believe that the reason that God let us have this ability to be disappointed is because he put something in us that craves for something more, Another place, the last place we can find disappointment is that disappointment can be relational, situational, but it can also be spiritual. Disappointment can be spiritual. It's entirely possible for us to find ourselves disappointed in God. In John 11, we're going to look at this story about Lazarus and these two women. They were sisters, Mary and Martha. We kind of looked at this the last time we all met together, but we're going to look at it tonight again through a different lens. I want you to watch what happens. Verse 1, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now was sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So Mary and Martha have this really close relationship with Jesus. Like, these girls were tight with him. And so was their brother Lazarus. It goes on, verse 3. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one that you love is sick. Do you notice how they worded that? It wasn't like, Jesus, Lazarus is sick. It was more like, Lord, this is just me inserting myself into scripture here. Lord, the one that you love is sick, like your best friend, like you love him. Don't you want to come and do something? Don't you want to come? He's so sick, can't you come and help us? It kind of sounds like some of my prayers sometimes. Like, Lord, I know you love me. I know you've got great plans for me. Your word tells me that you've got amazing things in store for me. I know that you've got all the hairs on my head counted, and this is what I need then. A little manipulation in the prayer. Later in verse 17, we read this. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So Lazarus was dead. Dead. Like, it was too late. What's the point now? Like, why did you even come if you knew you were going to be so late? And I think that the fact that the scriptures tell us that Martha went out to meet Jesus when she heard that he was coming shows us just how close they were. Because if Lazarus was dead, which he already was, like, why get up out of your grief? Like, why get up and go meet him? I think it's because Martha, now remember Martha, she's the take care of business, clean the house, get ready for the company, bossier, probably older sister. I think that she's so close to Jesus. I think she didn't have a problem going out and telling him, you're late. Look at this, verse 21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Can you imagine talking to the Son of God like that? But listen, you want to know why that verse is so important? It shows us that he's okay. Like, he's okay with our disappointment. He can handle it. He's even okay with our disappointment in him. And then her sister Mary comes. She comes next. Verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Mary blamed him too. She blamed him too. And then listen, look at what Jesus did next. This is that famous, shortest verse in the Bible. We'll start in verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Verse 35, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Yeah, he wept, but do you know why he wept? There's just one reason why he would have wept. He wept because Mary and Martha were weeping. And so Jesus wept with him. If you don't think that Jesus cares about your pain, about your disappointment, I just want you to think about this story for a minute. Like, Jesus knew he was gonna bring Lazarus back from the dead in just moments. Like, literally, it's 8 verses later, and yet he weeps with those who are weeping, even while he knows the rest of the story. See, some of us, we're disappointed in God because we think the story is over. But maybe we're just in the middle. Maybe there's still 8 verses left. Maybe he isn't finished yet. But hear me tonight, it's okay in the middle. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be disappointed in him, not sinning in our disappointment, not shutting him out in our disappointment or turning from him or running from him, but it's okay to be disappointed in him because he's shown us that he can handle it. And because we don't have the ability to understand God's ways, we're going to find it easy to be disappointed when God doesn't do things our way. When he doesn't do the things that we think he should do or in our time frame. So how do we deal with the disappointment? We've looked at where it's found. Now, how do we deal with disappointment? First, 3 quick things. First, we just need to acknowledge our disappointment. Be honest with yourself about your disappointment. Don't lie to yourself. And listen, church ladies, we are some of the best at doing this, aren't we? I bet some of you did this out of that food truck just an hour ago, and someone was like, how's it going? And you're like, fine, it's fine, everything's fine. I saw this shirt, look at this shirt. I saw this shirt on Facebook this week. Look at it, I'm fine, it's fine, everything's fine. How many of you could wear that shirt like every single day, right? Because it's just what we do. We push through. Sometimes we don't even let ourselves feel what it is that we're feeling. You know what? It's okay to be sad when things don't turn out as you hoped. Part of navigating disappointment before it becomes discouragement is to just acknowledge our loss, acknowledge that disappointment. During difficult seasons, David in the Bible, he pours out his heart to God. He writes this in Psalm 62:8. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. I think David lived convinced that God was a safe place to unwrap his secret hurts. And I know sometimes it can feel hard to trust God with your hurt, but when you pour out your problems to God, God pours his perspective into you. And if I'm going to be completely transparent tonight, though, this is where it gets tricky for me. Because here's how I find myself. I can quickly fall into, when I start acknowledging disappointment in my life, I can quickly fall into an everything is awful mindset. Like, I can be disappointed in a couple things over here, or maybe this one thing really disappointed me. But before I know it, the enemy has me convinced that I'm just disappointed in everything, that everything is horrible. Like, it's an all or nothing lie that I think that the devil uses on us when we are disappointed. Because it's a lie to believe that I can be unhappy about one thing and not be happy about anything else. Like, and if we can learn to just acknowledge that this is what happens to us, this is a very real way that our very real enemy tries to attack us, then it's going to be harder for this type of thing to sneak up on us. We need to acknowledge our disappointment. Next, examine your expectations. So disappointment occurs when we feel something is not as good as we thought it should have been, right? And those beliefs that we have, they are based on expectations. And so when you have expectations, I have it up here on the screen. When you have some expectations that are unexamined, when we have unexamined expectations, what do they lead to? Unexamined ones will lead to unrealistic ones. If you haven't really taken a look at what you're expecting, it can be unrealistic. Unrealistic expectations then lead to unrealized expectations. And over time, unrealized expectations, that's what can leave us disappointed on our way to being discouraged. So tonight, Maybe there's someone in the room who needs to just examine your expectation. Like, did I set my expectation too high? Like, do I need to ask God tonight to help me calibrate my expectation? Maybe you set your expectation on the wrong thing. Maybe you thought, if I can just get this specific job, then that's gonna fix every other thing in my life. And then you get the job and life's not as perfect as you thought it would be. Or maybe you thought, if I can just get married, or if I can just start a family, or if I can just expand my family, then I'm gonna feel whole or feel complete. And maybe you get what you've been dreaming about, but that perfect life is still not there. It doesn't feel any different. Listen, God will not allow something to fulfill us in every way possible, because that's his job. That's just his job. So tonight, maybe God's asking you to just examine some of those expectations. The very last thing is this. The last step in dealing with disappointment is turning to God, turning to Jesus. When disappointment leaves us reeling, like, we've really got two choices. We can run to Jesus, or we can run from Jesus. And there might be some people in the middle. This might be you tonight, that you might like to just do nothing, like stay stuck emotionally. Like, you just like to be ticked, like you like to be in a funk. Like, just leave me alone. Like, I don't want to get up out of this right now. There might be some others who are like, I'll handle it myself. I can do this myself. I don't need help. I think that even both of those two people are running from God, not turning. If you're not turning towards God, you're turning away from him. It was almost 3 years ago now that Colby and I were excited. He was about to begin a sabbatical, a 6-week sabbatical, and we had never done this in the course of all of our ministry work, never taken that long off without preaching. And so we were excited. He was excited. We were facing a time where we were going to take away his phone and have him totally unplug and rest and have a time to read, visit family, do some house projects. But it was the very, very first week of his sabbatical when he began to get sick. And there were mornings when he was able to get out of bed, but only for a few hours. I remember being with some family one day, and we went to get coffee, but by the time that was done, like, he was just back in his room for the rest of the day. I'd never seen him in that much pain in my life. And through a series of doctor's appointments and urgent care visits and multiple times in the emergency room, we finally got a diagnosis, finally got answers, but wasn't the diagnosis that we were hoping for. Not life-threatening, but I knew enough that I knew that it was going to be something that he was going to deal with for the rest of his life. So instead of letting myself really in that moment feel anything or turning to God in that moment, I went into full-time fix-it mode. Like, I was like, all right, well, who do we need to go see? Like, what specialist do we need to go see? I will get you in. I will do research. Like, who do I need to talk to? Like, I was doing everything I could to cover up all of my disappointment with just keeping busy, doing anything that I could in my own strength. And I was good until I wasn't. And the breaking point came a few weeks later when I saw signs of that same thing in our then 3-year-old son. And inside I was heartbroken, but I wasn't dealing with the Lord about it at all. I'm sure you've heard Psalm 34:18. It says this, it says, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those who are crushed in spirit. But he couldn't do that for me because I was keeping my heartbreak from him. And in that moment, I felt like God say to me, Kristen, I know you're heartbroken. And instead of turning away from me, why don't you turn towards me? It's like he was saying, I come close to the brokenhearted, but you're keeping me at a distance. You know, you can picture yourself doing this with someone in your life, right? A spouse or something, like they hurt you and then they try to come close to you and you're like, no, don't touch me, back up. Like, I feel like that's what I was doing to God. And in our disappointment, the worst thing you can do is turn from God. Do you know in the Bible, it actually tells us in Luke 14 that that's why, one of the reasons why Jesus came, it says Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted. But some of us in our hurt, we just say, I don't want you to touch me. God says he'll come near to the brokenhearted, but we've got to let him. We've got to turn towards him. We've got to let him come close. And I want to encourage you tonight to even just take that one step further and not just turn towards him in your disappointment, opening up your heart, but open up your mouth and tell God, tell him about your disappointment, voice that disappointment. You know, this is actually a recipe for something called lament, which is a scriptural act. Lament means to give an honest, faith-filled complaint to God. And just like it's vital for physical health, if you have an infected wound, it's vital for physical health to drain that wound. But it's also vital for spiritual health to release the pent-up stress that forms in times of disappointment. And when doctors open up and release an infection from the wound, they're not doing it just to continually release infection. They're doing it so that that wound can heal. And the same is true when you lament. And so when I felt like God was saying to me, Kristen, I come close to the brokenhearted. Come close to me, like turn towards me. Tell me all about it. I felt like I was having a Mary, Martha, Jesus moment when they went out to tell him, you're too late, my brother's already dead. And I was like, God, why? Why is this happening? Why is this happening to my family? We've given our life to serve you. Why is this happening right now? In a moment, I know you could have prevented all of this. And in that moment, you guys, you know what happened? He didn't fix anything. He didn't fix anything. But as I began weeping, I just felt like I heard him say, I know, I'm sorry. Have you ever been there? Have you felt that? When you're at the end of your strength, you've tried everything, nothing works. You're in a place where you said, I've never wanted to be here. I don't know how I got here. My heart is hurting. Sometimes you just need to hear the God of the universe say to you, I know, and I'm sorry. Know this, it's okay to cry about it. But I want to push us one step further tonight. While crying is human, I think lamenting is Christian. There are over a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. There's an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations. It's a book of lament. And what I didn't realize that summer as I began weeping and just being honest with the Lord about my disappointment, that God was going, I know, and I've got this. And it might be 8 verses later, it might be 8 years later, and it might be in a way that you never expected, but I've got this, I know. A lament is a prayer for God to act. And I don't think it's something that the enemy wants us to do, because when we're lamenting and we're crying out to God to do something that I cannot do, I think that's when we begin in our disappointment to be honest, and that's when we begin to heal. So tonight, we're gonna take the next 5 minutes or so in the presence of God and maybe do something that you've never done before. And that's lamenting, sharing with God, sharing our disappointment with him, an honest, faith-filled complaint to God. So I invite you right now just to close your eyes, bow your heads right where you are, and I want you to try in this moment to act like there's no one else in the room. we're gonna play a song. We're gonna play it pretty loud because here's what I want you to do. If you feel comfortable tonight, I don't want you just to have this conversation in your heart or in your mind. Like, I want you to use your mouth. Like, we talk to each other all the time. We talk to each other over coffee. We talk to each other over lunch. I want you to talk to God tonight. You can do it right where you are, sitting at your seat. You can get up, move to the back of the room if you want to. You can come to this altar, ladies. This altar in this church is always open. I just want you to begin to be honest with him tonight about your disappointment. Jesus, we know that you are close to the brokenhearted because your word tells us that. God, we believe that. We ask tonight that you give us the strength to first acknowledge our disappointment. Help us if we need to examine some of our expectations. But most importantly, God, tonight, would you help us in this moment turn towards you, to let you come close. Amen.
You say you're near to the broken. You say your peace passes understanding. You say you're hope for the hurting. Where are you now? Come close. I'm on the verge of breaking. Come close. I'm desperate for your presence. Come close. The weight of pain is crushing. Come close. She touched your hem and you healed her. You opened eyes with the dirt we walk on. When will I wake from this nightmare? Where are you now? Where are you now? So come close.
Lord promised to come close to the brokenhearted. And it's not about making it better in the moment. It's about pouring out your heart to God. It's about being present in your pain. God's here. He is here tonight. He is here in this room. If you're not already standing to your feet, would you stand with us tonight? Well, this would be an amazing place to end the service in this moment. But I believe there's an even better way. In the book of Exodus, we read about Moses. And Moses was called by God to lead the children of Israel out of captivity in Egypt. And God led them out. God parted the Red Sea. They walked through that. They are on their way to the promised land. God had come through for Moses in so many ways, so many supernatural ways. He'd seen God move in his life, and now he is in the desert, and they're headed to the promised land, and he begins to get disappointed, I think. Disappointed in the way things are going. And I think we see him lamenting to God in Exodus 33. I'm gonna read this verse to you. Verse 12, it says this: one day Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me, take these people up to the promised land, but you haven't told me who you're gonna send with me." He's like, God, I know the promise that's in front of me. I know what you've promised to me, but I'm in the middle here, and I don't understand how it's gonna work. And I don't understand all of the details and how you're leading me, and you haven't told me who's going with me. And he voices that to the Lord, and listen to what the Lord says back to him. The Lord replied, "I will personally go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest, and everything will be fine for you." And Moses goes, hold up. I didn't know that there was like a scenario where you weren't gonna go with me. Listen to what he says. He says, Moses said, "If you don't personally go with us, don't make us leave this place. Because how will anyone know that you look favorably on me and on your people if you don't go with us? For your presence among us sets your people and me apart from all the other people on earth." The Lord replied to Moses, "I'll indeed do what you have asked, for I look favorably on you, and I know you by name." And then Moses says back to God, "All right, show me your glory. Show me your glory." Like he goes from being disappointed and lamenting to God in one moment, turning around to him and saying, "Show me a side to yourself that you have never showed me before. Don't let me stay disappointed in what's disappointing me, but help me focus on you. Show me your glory." And so tonight, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna lift up our eyes from our own disappointment. We're gonna turn our eyes on Jesus tonight, and we're gonna ask